In this video, we're going to attempt to understand more about events and the concept of postback and understand page state a little bit better. This is an important fundamental concept to understand because ASP.NET is significantly different than classic ASP in this regard. In classic ASP, you basically had a regular HTML form that was common to CGI applications, to any other type of platform. However, in Visual Studio.NET and with the .NET framework more specifically, you have the concept of events. These are not your typical HTML form controls. When we take a look at the HTML for this web form designer, we'll notice that you still have your typical body tag and form tag that are all part of HTML, but you have something called a server control that is exclusive to the .NET framework that allows these controls to be processed on the server. In fact, if you take a look at this button control near the end of its definition, you'll notice that it says run at equals server. What this is simply saying is that whenever somebody clicks that button, what will happen is there will be some code that will actually be run for this button that will exist in a code behind for this web page. Now notice here at the top you have code behind equals webform1.aspx.vb. This file is where the code lives that handles the button click event. For example, we're going to open up that webform1.aspx.vb file and notice that whenever anybody clicks on button 1, there will be a very Visual Basic-like click event that's handled within this file. And when it's clicked, we're going to put the text learnvisualstudio.net into a label. And we are also going to do the same thing if they click on the button 2, which is part of our web form that we see here. Here's button 1 and button 2. So the first thing that we're going to do is just build our application, and then we're going to actually view this page in the browser within the main area to demonstrate how these events work. So when you click the Click Me button, notice that the code behind is called and learnvisualstudio.net is set into the label control. And we're going to click the No Click Me button and haha. But the real story is not that the code behind was called whenever we select one of these buttons and in order to handle the click event and thereby changing the text within the label. The real story is actually what these server controls generate whenever they're delivered to the client. The .NET framework takes on the responsibility of sniffing what type of browser the client of the web page actually has. And based on knowing what type of browser it has, whether it's Internet Explorer 5 or 6 or whether it's maybe version 3 or 4 of Netscape, it will create the web page in such a way that that browser can understand how to represent what we've designed within our web form designer. And as we take a look at this page, let's right-click and select View Source so we can actually see the HTML that was generated for our Internet Explorer 6.0 browser. Now we'll notice that, first of all, it took all of those ASP button server controls and it turned them into regular input tags that are common to all HTML applications. And here's another one where it actually generated straight HTML. Notice also that at the very end that it adds a style tag which defines the actual position where that button should be placed. Now, if this had been a Netscape version 3 browser, for example, it would not use this tag. Instead, it would probably try to represent what we see here in our web form designer with tables or whatever it had to do in order to make that page look correctly. And again, what do you have to do to make this work? Absolutely nothing. This is built into the .NET framework, and it's a very powerful tool that maybe in times past you would have to create several versions of your page in order to get them to render correctly on all the different versions of browsers. So this is a huge benefit that you should consider when developing ASP.NET applications versus classic ASP applications. Maybe your company is a little bit shy on moving to the new technology, but this is a real time-saving mechanism, and it really prevents a lot of problems for your potential customers and clients whenever they take a look at your web pages, that they can see what you meant to represent regardless of the browser that they use. So to recap the first topic, which was events, whenever you click a button, what happens is that the code behind for that button will get called, and in this case we've changed the text of a label to LearnVisualStudio.net, or our other button will change it to a different value. But there's another element to the story, and that is the topic of postback. In classic ASP, whenever you designed your web forms using code, typically what you would do is set your action property of the form equal to perhaps another page that will process the results of the form post. For example, if you had a button and a text box and you were to click that button, it would send the value of the text box to a second classic ASP page, which could then process and maybe write out different information on the screen based on that. However, by default, with ASP.NET Web Forms, what happens is that whenever you click a button, for example, whenever you click this button, the action is not to send it to a different page, but rather to post it back to this same webform1.aspx page. And the values of the text boxes, of the labels, of the buttons are all sent back to the same page. Now, what's the reason for this? Well, the answer to that question is so that it can process any of these button clicks or any of these new selections from the drop-down list box, or whatever other interaction happens while the user's on this web page. And this is the concept of postback, which is not necessarily exclusive to ASP.NET. You could still do this in classic ASP, but you had to be much more deliberate about it. If we were to take a look at our HTML, notice that there is no action property within the form tag. However, as the page is generated, as the web client is called and our page is created, and we take a look at the actual HTML that was generated to create that page by ASP.NET, we'll notice that the form tag now has an action property which tells it to post back to webform1.aspx. Now, the last topic that we're going to take a look at is something that is also extremely important, not from a practical standpoint. I don't think you'll ever have to really do anything with page state or the view state property that's included within the generated web form. And we'll take a look at that in a second. But for your understanding of how pages maintain state, even though they're being posted back continuously, this is an important concept to understand. Let's take a look at the application one more time in its completed format. Now, I want you to notice what happens. I have created a drop-down list box with the names of the members of my family, and I'm going to select the name of my oldest son here, Conrad, and I'm going to click the Click Me button. And notice that the text changed, but Conrad's name is still selected. Now I'm going to click the second button. So I'm going to keep clicking back and forth, but each time Conrad's name is selected. Now, in classic ASP, what you'd have to do to accomplish this is once the form was posted back to itself, You'd have to read what was the selected value within the drop-down list box, and then you'd have to repopulate the list box as the page is being regenerated, looking for the identifier for the one that was selected, and then select it again. However, in ASP.NET, you do not have to do this. The .NET framework does this for you. Let's take a look at how this works. First of all, what we've done here in our code behind is when the page is loaded, I'm going to add the names of my family to the drop-down list box. But I only do that one time. I check to make sure that this page.isPostback equals false. And we'll take a look at the page object at a future point in time. But what this line of code is doing is saying, make sure that this is not a postback situation. In other words, make sure that we only populate this list box one time. And any subsequent clicks, the button one click or the button two click, and when this page is regenerated, do not repopulate the drop-down list box. Now that might sound kind of odd, but what happens is, and let's take a look at the HTML behind the scenes, there is this hidden form field, type equals hidden, name equals view state, with this long alphanumeric value right here, and I'm going to scroll off to the right-hand side of the screen so that you can see it all. Just look at that line. There's just a bunch of letters, numbers, uppercase, lowercase. These are encoded values that maintain the state of the current page that we're on. So, for example, what this line of code is doing in HTML is indicating that when this page gets posted back to itself, the value here is interpreted as a drop-down list box that has 4 values in it, and one of the values are selected, so that we do not have to regenerate all the code necessary to recreate the state of this drop-down list box. Now that's a hard concept to articulate and a hard concept to understand, but what it does is it reduces the amount of processing that needs to occur, the amount of code that you need to write in order to maintain state on your postback web pages. And this is not just true with drop-down list boxes, but any type of server control that you place within your Web Forms application. They all have this view state property. Now, as we go in and create more applications using ASP.NET, some of these things might become more obvious. We might get accustomed to thinking this way. At first, it's very hard to think this way, and to understand exactly how ASP.NET is working behind the scenes. But we're going to explain more about that in future lessons. Right now, it's important for you to understand how events work and how the code behind for a given web form plays a part in this by handling events that are triggered by the user on the web form, how postback works, and then how also the page state, or rather the view state for that page, will prevent unnecessary coding on the part of the developer in order to maintain state on a page. This helps you make much more interactive applications in a much more timely manner than maybe what you're accustomed to in the past using classic ASP. So I hope that you've learned something about ASP.NET in this lesson and that you've enjoyed this video.